It is my pleasure now to introduce our guest, Bourcard Nesin, who is a beverage analyst for Rabobank Food and Agribusiness Research. They are a Dutch bank that focuses in the agriculture and therefore sometimes brewing sectors. Bourcard is an expert on disruptors, tech, consumer trends, and beer, wine, spirits, and coffee. He is the host, as Julie mentioned, of the Liquid Assets podcast from Rabobank.
Do not read out my grad school GPA, please.
It's on your LinkedIn. It's fair game. And he's been quoted in many prestigious publications. So thank you for joining us, Bourcard, to talk about sustainability, packaging, inflation, how those things all relate to each other. We appreciate you being here.
And as I told you, Kate, when I found out you'd be hosting, I was like, it's like my birthday was canceled and replaced with an extra Christmas. It's, you know, I love Brian, but you are not second best. You are.
Well, thank you. I do appreciate that. Excellent. Well, you and I chatted a little bit already about where we should kick off today. And I think one of the areas that we talked about is geography, like literal area. This is the North American Guild of Beer Writers. So do you want to give us just like situate us in terms of how US and Canadian beer packaging compares to the rest of the world? Like what is our landscape here, and is that very different?
The US and Canada do not deserve to be lumped together in this regard. So I guess the thing that you know, I've been invited here to talk about it, well, the reason I've been invited to some degree is because our team has just done a bunch of research on you know, different packaging choices, how those different packaging choices are being impacted by inflation, and simultaneously there's, you know, the drip of sustainability. You know, used to be just like this thing you could sweep under the rug. Now corporates are, just like in the last 2 years, actively trying to actually make a difference there. Most of it's bullshit. I think that's fair that we all know most of it's bullshit, most of it's marketing, but still there are some good faith actors there actually trying to make a difference. So there's kind of a confluence of these two things happening where maybe the current situation around inflation is aligning to some degree with the industry's need to adopt more sustainable packaging. So I guess the first thing is like, is the US better or worse than other countries? And the simple answer is just in about every category. We are exceptional at being the worst in this area. So like if we look at just like recycling rates, just a good starting point, let's use that. Like, you know, aluminum cans, US, pretty good. We like, what a good job, America. We recycle 53% of aluminum cans. Japan, 99.7. I mean, Brazil, 98. China, 98. Europe, on average, 76% of aluminum cans get recycled. We're talking plastic, PET bottles, the water bottles, 30% of PET bottles in the US gets recycled. And in Japan, 90%, China, 75%, Europe, 64%. Again, less than half. And when it comes to glass, we're also terrible. So 54% of US glass bottles are getting recycled. Well, it's 79% in Europe. And I'm saying numbers, but just know that every number in the US is really low and the numbers everywhere else are really high. And so, yeah, the US is kind of way behind in that regard. And a lot of it has to do with the fact that we don't really have a centralized system for setting up recycling systems, right? So every state has their own way, and basically Texas would be loath to do anything, you know, liberals want. So own the libs. They'll never pass recycling. It's my right to litter all I want. I'm being facetious there, but to some extent, it's fair to say that, you know, the hodgepodge recycling system in which only 10 states have a deposit for recycling bottles or beverage bottles is fair to say, hey, that's not a very good system. So US is far behind on recycling, which I think is a decent proxy for understanding how much worse it is in terms of, its systems, but also we fundamentally have a different system for a lot of beverage packaging, which is that a lot of countries, especially lower and middle income countries, so we're talking Africa, Latin America, Southeast Asia, have returnable packaging, right? I lived in grad school where I got a 3.69 GPA. I lived in Ethiopia doing research on fertilizers and entrepreneurship and whatever, doesn't matter. It was a weird project. I basically paid a bunch of really poor people to collect animal bones. I don't want to get into it, but it was a cool project.
And it sounds like you did well to earn your 3.69 GPA. You were good at
a lot of time on the ground.
Project,
yeah. It was it was quite an ordeal. But while you're there, I remember going out to a local shop and buying a bottle of ouzo. And the bottle of ouzo was 50 birr, about $2.50. And they told me it's actually 100 because there's a 50 birr deposit. So literally the cost of the bottle was equal to the cost of the actual product inside. And I thought these guys were screwing with me because I was, a foreigner. And I said, no, it can't be right. So I went to my friend and he goes, no, that's the actual price. And so in these other countries, you end up getting return rates for packaging that gets used over and over again. And that's really important because guess what? Melting down glass and aluminum requires a lot of energy. And if you just use it again, it's actually far less greenhouse gas impact from that. Sorry, so I rambled a bit there, Kate.
Oh, what I'm hearing from you is we all go back to growlers. That's all I'm hearing.
Okay, so I'm looking at another. So I just literally found this, luckily, from the Oregon what is it? Beverage Recycling Cooperative. So literally the best system in the United States for recycling is Oregon, and I think that's going to be the basis for most of the best bottle bills as we look at states passing legislation to improve recycling. I think that model is what works best. And basically it's like EPR, extended producer responsibility. And in this case, all the distributors in the state have a shared responsibility for making sure things get collected. And that is kind of technically voluntary, but virtually total. So I think there's literally one distributor that isn't part of it at this point in Oregon. And so in the United States, so they sent me this PowerPoint, and they have this graphic in which they show in the United States, 0% of beverage packaging is reusable. That is not true. You get the big blue jugs of water that you order for your office water thing. That's reusable. Kegs are reusable. Local dairy is often in reusable packaging, but there isn't a lot out there. So for the most part, if you go to Western Europe, you buy beer, most of the time it's in a standardized reusable bottle.
So sounds like Oregon has a decent system for this. What would it take for other states to adopt that?
Oh, I mean, legislation is the short answer. But yeah, what I was thinking actually, it would be kind of fun to talk a little bit about. And again, I'm really open to anyone jumping in to interrupt me or ask a question. Not jumping over you, Kate, but saying
I can do that.
I'm not gonna. It's like a small group. I think you can handle it. But I was thinking actually, it might be good to come back to that narrative about why this is becoming a more important issue in the context of inflation, if that makes sense. So I guess the thesis of a lot of our recent writing is again around this theme around inflation and beverage packaging, and the key here is that different beverage packagings have different greenhouse gas impacts, and most of that greenhouse gas impact is related to the energy needed to produce it, right?
To produce the original package.
To produce the real little package, but also, if you have really heavy packaging, for example, it takes more energy to move it in a truck, right? So half of the half of some wine bottles, if they really heavy wine bottles, half of the weight can come from just the glass itself, right? And so if you have to not only produce that, but also to transport it to the distributor, and then from the distributor to the retail and the retailer, and then you have to recycle it and all that stuff, that also adds meaningful amounts of greenhouse gases. So I'm looking at this numbers from the AB InBev and Carlsberg, who published this as part of their annual report. And these guys sell in all these different packaging types, right? And so their estimates are that if we're talking about, per serving, a glass beer bottle produces about twice as much greenhouse gases as a can, right? More or less. However, a can produces 3 times as much greenhouse gases per serving as PET, is plastic, right? So literally, the way one person and kegs are like 1/25th the greenhouse gas impact of one-way glass. And the way one person explains this problem to me, because I think plastic is vilified pretty consistently because of the waste, and everyone hates seeing turtles with straws in their noses, and that's really horrible. But if you actually think about greenhouse gases, like glass is way worse. And so you end up having this problem that one person I spoke to, who's a CEO of a company in Europe, said the dilemma is do you want to choose between an ocean full of plastic or an ocean that is rising to your front door. So basically, plastic waste or greenhouse gases, and it's really people. I think the public don't understand that choice. And so if we then look at something like returnable glass, so if we say, hey, we're going to use this glass bottle over and over and over again, 20 times or something like that, the greenhouse gas impact of that is about a fifth of what it would normally. So 80% reduction in greenhouse gases, which is about the same as plastic, right? And so plastic and glass that's reusable have the same greenhouse gas impact, but glass doesn't have the end of life problem. So returnable glass is pretty much the best packaging solution, or returnable plastic, which is the way a lot of Coca-Cola is moving in Latin America. And how does this relate to something like inflation? Well, the important thing to understand is that the reason glass has a greenhouse gas impact is because it takes so much energy to melt glass, right? Like if you think about the amount of energy it takes to melt a plastic bottle, like you can melt it with a lighter. You can't melt glass with a lighter. And so you need to use fossil fuels to create all that energy to melt glass. And even if you recycle the glass over and over and over again, what you need to do is crush the glass, melt it again, and then reuse it. And that is not, it still is most of the greenhouse gases are caused by the amount of energy it takes to melt glass. And cans are also, like a surprise to me, cans are like 3 times worse than plastic. So that like water in a can, like, yeah, you don't have the plastic problem, but you have the greenhouse gas problem, right? And this is like a thing that I think a lot of companies don't want to talk about. But
yeah, how did plastic so desperately lose the PR battle on this one, and how did glass get out on top?
Because imagining a CO2 molecule having a dipole moment, shivering in the atmosphere and heating up the planet does not produce the same amount of sympathy as plastic in the ocean, and seeing whales caught in fishing nets, and children bathing in rivers with giant islands of trash. Like there's a lot more physical, but it also is, it also means that glass, like, nobody talks about how bad that aspect of glass is. And I think it's the irony, I think, is that you see a lot of environmentally focused brands are packaging in like really heavy glass packaging, and that hey, for the environment we don't use plastic, and now you use this, like, because it's premium, you use really heavy glass. And that's the other thing, is that, like, if in wine, for example, there was a study in Germany that showed that like 33% of the variability in the greenhouse gases for a wine, like for a serving of wine, was to the amount, the weight of the glass in the bottle.
Mm-hmm.
So
Wow.
like literally, you can reduce your greenhouse gases as a winery, as a wine industry by 33% more or less, like of what you can control by simply using less glass in your bottle. It's not switching away from glass, it's just using less, and there's things like that.
But we love the big, heavy, fancy cab bottle that weighs
that's how
20
you know it's
pounds, and
good.
I need 2 hands to pour it. Yeah. When you were doing this research, did you, especially internationally, did you find companies doing really cool stuff with packaging to become more sustainable besides reusable? Are there papers and cardboards, and I don't know, what were you seeing that was actually kind of hopeful?
Yeah. So it's always important to remember that paper packaging is basically paper packaging surrounding a plastic packaging. So like there's no such thing as paper packaging. There might be for like milk or something like that, but most beverages are going to have like a plastic liner. And just like cans do. Cans have plastic in them too. I mean, most of it's quite simple. So there are companies that are changing their materials, switching from say glass to plastic, or perhaps lightweighting. So there's a reason why you get the cheap water bottles, they're so crinkly and easy to crush, is because those companies have actively reduced the amount of material they're using. Most companies have made a commitment to use recycled plastic, for an example, but that has created a weird market where recycled plastic is actually now more expensive than virgin plastic. And a lot of the beverage manufacturing plastics put into beverage manufacturing don't actually come from beverages, right? They're coming from like automobile parts and recycling, because the beverage industry has continually taken no responsibility for creating systems that actually capture the waste they produce. There's a couple of other ones that are really cool, improving recyclability. So instead of having multiple kinds of material on your packaging, having like plastic and metal, but also like these other things, is really bad for recycling. So having a single material packaging is actually quite helpful. Using white materials. So for example, Heineken is fucking everything up by using green in the United States. Nobody needs green bottles. If Heineken were to switch to brown or white glass, like a clear glass, they would be far more recyclable in the United States, because nobody wants that green glass.
And
the same thing
the white will allow them to skunk their beer, so that's important.
Yeah. Because that would
we wouldn't want fresh tasting Heineken. That would not be.
No, nobody would want. Well, I thought it was more of a comment of like, nobody like would want a skunky tasting, Dutch lager, right? But the other one is so Coca-Cola recently announced that they were going to, I think it was 7-Up. Like 7-Up served in like green plastic, that they're going to switch to clear. Like those kind of things make a difference.
Yeah.
Improve the recyclability. Sprite, thank you.
Sprite. Thank you, how does the inflationary environment right now put pressure on companies to do this?
I mean, I guess if we talk about the greenhouse gases are impacting the greenhouse gas impact of say glass is a consequence of the amount of energy it takes to produce glass. And if energy costs have gone up astronomically, particularly in Europe, where you're hearing about wineries that have to buy bottles on the spot market paying 2 or 3 times more than they would have a couple of years ago, the cost of that extra glass to make your product seem premium, the choice between glass versus aluminum or glass versus plastic is making a real difference in your margin, because the cost of energy has gone up, and that's the primary cause of these greenhouse gases. Those two priorities are seeming to align. And you're seeing this with Coca-Cola. They launched the Botella Única, which is a universal bottle that they put all their different soft drinks in Brazil, for example, and they're able to pay, charge the consumer less for that. And so the other add-on is that because they can save money by using these reusable bottles, they are able to then sell them cheaper. And because consumers are being income constrained by inflation, it now makes them more cost competitive in an environment where price elasticity may be rising. And so they can actually offer a better deal. And even better, the other thing you can do is sell larger package sizes, right? So we talk about the amount of packaging per serving is much lower in a 2-liter bottle than in a half-liter bottle of something. And so it's just like the surface area to volume ratio is lower. And so you can actually do that. And they were able to sell a larger pack size with less cost for materials at a lower price point at a moment when consumers are really price sensitive. And that's a win-win-win for them, and a really good story for their sustainability.
I want to ask a couple of the questions that were submitted from members ahead of time, because I do not have a fancy Zoom account, so we only have 40 minutes. So I want to get to the ones that people submitted in advance. One of them is asking if the US magically overnight flipped to a returnable bottle system, like some places in Europe have, what would the transition cost be to producers? You need bottle washers, return crates, etc. Do we have any sense of what that would cost?
I mean, it's a real problem. So we wanted to go to a returnable system, which is the best system, like no doubt, the best system. I wrote a report on this, and I think the best thing that the world can do to like protect returnable packaging is to kind of treat them like rainforests. Be like, let's just protect what we haven't lost already, because the simple reality is that we moved away from those systems for a big reason, a bunch of reasons actually. But number one is retailers don't want to deal with taking returns. Brands don't want to deal with reverse logistics of collecting, washing, sorting, going through all that nonsense. It's kind of more expensive when you don't have really low income people that are really price sensitive. You need to pay quite a fee on top, and that can create some disincentives for buyers. But I think really the biggest one is that we're now in a global market, and producers have focused on centralized production. And if you want to produce centrally, it makes a lot more sense to collect and ship bottles if it's you're really close to your end market. But Corona needs to sell beer from Mexico, and are they really going to ship beer from Mexico into all the states from one manufacturing facility and then somehow collect all those bottles and bring them back? And so the reality is, in order to implement a returnable packing system in the United States, small producers are going to have a lot of trouble doing it. We spoke to one small producer in I think Madison, Wisconsin, that was doing some cool stuff. I think it was all 4 women founded brewery, actually, and good for them. But they were saying like less than 25% return rate in their packaging. And like, if you're talking about, they're actually saving money from that and paying off the bottle washer that they got like used. But the problem is if you want the greenhouse gas benefits of it, you're not going to see that with 25% return rate, right? So it's really hard for the most part. Where you're going to need to see is legislation. And my favorite part of doing this research was actually discovering that every manufacturer in the universe says they want legislation for extended producer responsibility, to say, hey, if you're going to produce packaging, you need to make sure it gets recycled. And then, like where I live in Maine, we passed an extended producer responsibility bill, and the Consumer Foods, basically the company that the lobbying group for all the CPG companies, so virtually name a big CPG company, they're represented by this group. They literally, this is a quote, and I pulled it out here because I love it so much. This is their response to the first extended producer responsibility bill passed in the United States. Maine could become a model for the rest of the nation. However, a lack of smart policymaking will result in Maine being the first in the nation to fail. The CPG industry owns our role in both the problem and the solution to the waste and recycling crisis, and is ready to partner with government in building a functioning recycling system where funding is dedicated exclusively to making recycling work. Let's work together to build an EPR system that sets the standard for other states and begins to fix the flawed recycling system now and for future generations. In other words, we're happy to talk about recycling until the moment you tell us we have to do it. And so this is deep hypocrisy. They're, as Jesse says, they're full of shit, and they are full of shit. Yeah. And this is the big problem, is that the moment, I actually spoke to a huge water manufacturer, and we were talking about sustainability, and they were like, I'm happy to do, sustainability as long as it makes us more money.
Yeah, well, we're all happy to do things that make us more money, sure, yeah.
Exactly.
In the short term too. Don't talk to me about the long term, yeah.
So the point is that the returnable system it requires a massive amount of collective action, and that collective action is probably only going to happen with massive legislation overhauls. So let's protect the systems we do have and hope that eventually we get a democracy that actually addresses these things.
If anyone else wants to jump in, please do, but there are a couple more submitted questions otherwise.
I thought I saw Julie with her hand up.
Yeah, Julie, what you got?
I feel pretty dumb asking this question, but I'm not an expert on sustainability, so I don't know. I might as well just toss it out there and ask. I know there's things like, like Dolium kegs, like one ways, things that get recycled. Obviously, kegs are more efficient, but is there any technology that's like out there that would eventually make plastic be okay for beer, like in individual servings?
Oh yeah,
we all hated cans.
I used to live next to
years ago,
yeah.
and now cans are just like, it's like perfectly normal to get a great beer in a can. Like, are we headed? Like, could that even be a possibility with like more sustainable plastic for individual servings?
Eastern Europe, baby. That's where it's at.
Yeah.
I used to live next to a Russian neighborhood in Brooklyn, and you would go to the stores, and there would just be like like 2-liter Coca-Cola bottles of beer everywhere.
Yeah. I mean, I used to be in the import world, so like I had seen it, but like I'm like, there's no way that people are going to catch on to this. And then you have like Belgian, like still, like in a bag where you slap it, and but then there's no like carbonation and all that. I'm fine with that, but I know that like the normal consumer is not. So I didn't know if people were working on fun things, more individual servings. I just think that would be interesting.
I think that I don't know. I've done this might not be an apt analogy, but I've tried to do some research on like the epidemiology of alcohol and drug use, and understand all the interrelated things. And the big concept there is harm reduction, right? So we need to just acknowledge that, people are going to do what they want, and we need to maintain credibility as, experts here. And so we're not here to ask for abstinence. What we want to do is stop people from making the worst decision. And I think that's pretty much where we are as an industry. We want to do harm reduction. And so acknowledging that people aren't going to accept the 2-liter bottles means that, hey, we need glass manufacturers to, use more renewable energy, to use less glass per unit. We need to get better recycling. Those are the kind of things that we can do.
Thanks.
Is there, this was a submitted question that I think is a good one. Are there any producers you've seen band together to form any kind of like a co-op or a resource group to combat rising packaging costs? Sort of collective buying, I guess.
I bet you would be better suited to do that. I do know, for example, that Byron Brewing over by UK is actively has washing equipment. They're German beer makers in Germany. Most beer is sold in returnable packaging, though that's falling. So 15 years ago, 70% of beverages sold in Germany were sold in returnable packaging. Today it's 40%. So that's how quick these returnable systems are dying. So, that's not good. But they're actually using that washing equipment for, the Oregon trial program for returnable bottles for breweries there. So there is certainly some stuff happening, but I'm sure you'd be.
So you could tweet at people.
I'm gonna mute Jesse real quick.
Okay. So I'm sure you guys would have better examples of those specific instances.
Yeah, I mean, some of the kind of like brewery collectives come to mind, not that that's their sole function, but like, the Canarchy model, the et cetera, that's, materials procurement seems to always be a part of that. For our last question, we'll zoom out from beer because we know you know about other stuff. What are some major sea changes in agribusiness over the last few decades?
No-till agriculture, sustainability is becoming a big thing.
Yeah.
Apparently there's this thing about, diversity and representation in all industries that's kind of important. I don't know. So yeah, I love that question. And I genuinely think somebody from our PR team like made that question, and I'm just so mad that it's so bad.
No, I mean, I don't think it's a bad question because we don't, as beer reporters, like, yes, like agriculture touches so much that we do, but like, I don't know, I don't consider myself like an expert on the agriculture business.
Okay, so I did take a trip out to Idaho recently to talk to barley farmers. I actually have a degree in agriculture. I thought I could save the world by, doing agriculture, and it was a bad idea. It didn't work, but happy I had the opportunity. But went out to Idaho to talk to barley farmers, and a lot of the barley farmers there were really frustrated because they're being put a lot of pressure on to reduce greenhouse gases in their production manufacturing, and the brewers are simultaneously asking for more from them, while not paying them anymore, right? And the issue is that you're now seeing within these large manufacturers like this dichotomy of having a buying team which is incentivized to reduce the costs of acquiring barley and grains and stuff year after year after year, right? I had a colleague that said if we have to reduce costs year after year after year, eventually they're going to be paying us to take their product. Well, at the same time, the sustainability team is acting on their incentive system to increase the responsibility that the farmer has to reduce scope 3 emissions that the company is not directly responsible for. And so what you're just seeing is this total misalignment of incentives within those companies, and eventually the farmers are the ones who suffer. So that's and that's happening on every part of the supply chain where there's a power mismatch.
All right, Zoom is counting me down in a very ominous way. This felt like way too little time, but Bourcard, thank you for joining us. We'll just have to have you back again, that's all. And thank you.